Welcome to episode 2 of the BUILD617 Podcast. I'm Nick. You know Nathan. We're on a mission to publicly explore Boston's tech scene, examine its past, and develop a plan for its future. We're doing it publicly because we aren't the only ones discussing this, and we want everyone to hear what these guests have to say. Before we get to our guest, I want to give Nathan a chance to give you a quick BUILD617 update.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so we've got a collection of 20 early stage founders, sponsors, and speakers who are going to be getting together for dinners over the next couple months. We've lined up some of Boston's top tech luminaries to speak there, and we're super excited to get things going. We're also honestly doing this as volunteers, so we're very grateful to Row for helping us sponsor this podcast, helping take care of some of our production costs, and for hosting some of our events. And if you're a startup looking to bank, I'd tell you to reach out to Will from Row, solid guy, happy to have their support. Also really grateful to Link Ventures for hosting us in this space. Great space. Nick, proud Link Ventures company, so go Link Ventures. Lastly, grateful to David Chang, our amazing guest today. So Nick, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. So today's guest is David Chang. And if you spent any real time in Boston, you probably crossed his path, whether you realized it or not. David started 6 companies and invested in over 100 more. His ventures have raised hundreds of millions, and his companies have returned a healthy multiple of that. He's been a CEO, a product leader, an entrepreneur in residence at HBS, worked directly with founders at the earliest, messiest stages of company building. Today, he's the founder and CEO of Via AI and a founding member of TBD Angels, one of the most active early stage angel groups in the region. But what really defines David is not just the number of companies or investments he's made, it is the role he's had as a force multiplier inside Boston tech. He's helped build the connective tissue of our ecosystem. He's worked on the Massachusetts Institute and Technology Exchange. He's served as a board trustee at Wentworth, and he's advised Babson College, all on top of spending years mentoring founders, students, and operators across the city. He's helped founders find clarity and capital and conviction before it was obvious they were going to succeed. There's a very clear through line through all of this. David is Boston through and through. He has chosen to build here, invest here, and stay here across multiple cycles, even when it might have been easier or more lucrative to move away, which is exactly why we're so excited to have this conversation with you. This conversation isn't actually just about David. It's about Boston as a system, what it rewards, what it cultivates, and why it sits on top of the academic world, yet sometimes struggles to turn that advantage into generational industry-defining companies. Why so much talent starts here and so much ambition eventually leaves. But first, let me just warm it up. We love Boston. So there's been a lot of kind of negative, or maybe better put, constructive conversations around the Boston tech scene.
Some of it from here, but yeah.
Some of it from here, some of it from others. Brian Halligan's been on Twitter a lot talking about it. And it's all been, with a constructive mindset. And that's the conversation we're going to have today. But first, let's get something out of the way. What's something that you love about building in Boston?
Sure. I love the question, and thanks for having me. Crazy amount of research. I did not realize you're going to do all that. I have one clarification though. So I didn't start 6 companies. I have been lucky to have been part of 6 startups, like 2 of which I started, and the other 4 were ones where I joined as a later employee. And so that also adds to a little bit of the perspective of what it's like to start companies, grow companies, what it's like as an exec. And so I kind of bring that perspective as well. But I just wanted to make sure that that part was clear.
I'm going to get on my researcher about that. They missed that one. But, actually happy to have a little broader perspective even. So
yeah. And honestly, what I love about Boston is you talk about the people, you're never going to enjoy building anything if you don't like the people. And I live in the South End. There's probably 100 people in the South End who are founders or operators or execs or investors. And it's like really hard to just like walk to coffee without running into them. I mean, there's a little bit of a microcosm. This morning I'm at the gym. We've got my wife who's working out next to me, and so she's the founder and investor. I've got Dave Bolter, who I think you guys know as well, and so he was like 2 treadmills down, and then Sarah Hodges from Pillar, and so that's just like an example of like this morning, like at 7 a.m, like who you get to see.
These are where deals and advice happen. Like this is BUILD617 gymnasium needs to happen. Is my takeaway.
There's something about like just being near the people that you want to be near, that like makes a huge difference. Now, 7 a.m, I barely even said hello. I think it was kind of like,
David at it again.
But one thing I love is just like how easy it is to get in front of people. And so for me, being up here now 25 years, that's probably been the single most important factor, like just having the people around you.
Yeah. Wow. I think it's funny because I used to live in the South End, had a little different experience, but I was never up at 7 a.m. I lived right above what my realtor told me he likes to call Little Bobby's, but I think everyone else calls Petit Robert Bistro. I lived like right above it. So I realize 7 a.m. was the time. So you love that connective tissue, love it. If 25-year-old David Chang was starting a company in Boston today, I guess better question, would he start a company in Boston today or would he go somewhere else?
I had to think about that for a little bit. I am such a Boston proponent, even though I grew up in New York, and of all places, I'm a transplant. I moved up here 27 years ago, thinking that New England would be this fantastic experience for 2 years, and I was like ready to leave. And a year and a half into that experience, I kind of stumbled upon some other startup. The thought of going back to New York was super appealing, but that one startup, because of the space that it was in, the people that were there, was just enough for me, like, you know what, why don't I just stay here a little bit longer? And so that was that 51-49 decision, like pretty much just mapped the next 25 years, right? And so I got lucky. I found someone great to work with, this guy named Chris Gardner, who was over at Underscore. And so I worked for him at that startup. But had it not been for that one decision to stay, I probably would have ended up somewhere else. And so as a 25-year-old, yes, I think I would continue to build here because there's great people, there's great companies, there's great assets, like all the things that you guys, I'm sure, will be talking about over the next couple episodes. If I was 21, I don't know.
Interesting.
Right? So if I hadn't had that like one or two strong pulls, like some magnet to keep me here, I probably would be great. Why don't I move somewhere else? I can go to the Valley. I can go to New York and go somewhere else. I can go to another country. But those are the things that I think that we'd want to do better in the Boston ecosystem. Make sure the people that are here in the brief period that they spend here, like give them a reason to stay. And so for me, it was just, meeting a couple great people, and it was in a space that was interesting. And had not been for that, I probably would be somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. At least from my personal experience, I think I definitely wanted to explore the Valley.
Mm-hmm. Sure, it's hard not to.
After being here, it's just like, what is it like to build out there? How is it different? And I'm curious to get your take on, if we want people to stay, should they be exposed to that?
Yeah, I never think it's a bad thing to keep your options open, right? And so even before I started as when I graduated from college, I was either going to stay in New York or I was going to go out to the Valley. And I just couldn't see myself there. I spent an entire week during spring break checking out to see whether or not it would be an interesting experience. And I just couldn't figure out, I couldn't see myself in that particular lifestyle. And my startups, many of them have been acquired by West Coast companies. And as a result, you stick around for a little while, you end up seeing what it's like building out there. And, it's obviously a great environment. The ability for you to start a new company and where you choose to start that company obviously is up to you. But if there's so much draw in one place for the things that you're interested in, then it's just really hard to leave, right? And so I think it was about 10 years ago, I was in between companies and I was thinking about, I can have a fresh start. And thinking about moving somewhere else was it was so difficult. Like when I just looked at who I knew, what assets they had, it was nearly impossible. And so there's definitely this locked in switching cost. Yep. And I think what we want to do is create a reason for people to stay. Now, I think during your first episode, you'd mentioned something around the instead of trying to keep people here, you give them a reason, right? And so I love that push-pull. And so really want to make sure that someone's aware of all the good stuff there and have them want to be here and want to build a company here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's actually dig in a little bit on what Boston did miss on, right? Because I hear you that 25-year-old you would have been locked in here. 21-year-old, it's a little more unclear. So I've been kind of collecting. We've collected a bunch of different ideas. People have been throwing around X. People have been throwing around LinkedIn. And so I'm just going to kind of rapid fire them at you. And I want your take. Yes, big deal. Doesn't really matter. Maybe it's a contributing factor, but small, whatever it might be, whatever your take is. All right. So one take is that it's actually all non-competes. California disallows non-competes. Massachusetts has allowed them for a long time. The argument here, I'll steel man it for you, is that, people with incredible domain expertise can't start companies where that domain expertise is most applicable, even if in practicality they're unlikely to get like sued. Just the threat of it, the specter of potentially being sued, is enough to prevent them from going off and like starting a company in the same domain where they're an expert. What's your take?
It's not a factor anymore. Yeah, I actually testified at the State House like many years ago about like how non-competes were impeding innovation. I think it's just a different world today. It's just not that big of a factor.
Okay, next take.
Yep.
Boston has 40 plus universities in it. But everyone only wants to talk about MIT and Harvard. There's tons of talented people outside of it. Absolutely. And actually, a lot of those people that only want to talk about MIT and Harvard are the MIT and Harvard people. So are they just too elitist versus, maybe the Bay where everyone feels like they can make it?
Yeah, of course. In this room, speaking to two MIT grads, and where am I right now? I feel like I'm on the other in Cambridge.
It was hard to say it. It was tough to ask the question, but I've heard it. So I'm giving you a chance to get in a fight with us right here, right now.
A little bit. So I'm a huge fan of the smart people that come in through all of the schools, and I think it's even more than 40, right?
Yeah,
like if you include some of the more specialty programs, I do think even though Harvard and MIT and Babson, I'll throw into the mix for entrepreneurship, have this draw, or at least have this perceived draw because of their reputation. The amount of ideas that come out of the other schools it probably like surpasses the just like the critical mass of those three. And so I do think it's a major asset in Boston. We don't do a great job of leveraging that. And I'm happy to share a little bit more of like some of the things that like some of the grassroots groups are doing. But it's a huge asset for sure.
All right, got one for you.
Mm-hmm.
The venture community is just scared out here, and so everyone just runs away. True or false?
They're risk averse, so I don't know if scared is the right way to put it. I do miss how things were maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, where it felt like the density here, the velocity here, the number of companies that were going from startup to A to B to exit, and then like recycling that talent, and then investors really jumping in very deeply, felt really different in like the mid 20, it was probably like 2014, 2015. And I do think for whatever reason that investors, at least locally, have changed their thesis where it's been harder to raise as an entrepreneur. And I'll kind of toss out two data points. So one is even our own raise, we found that there was less friction when you talk to an investor somewhere else. And so I don't know if it's just that's the velocity, they have a different risk profile. And because of that, the number of questions and how long it took, it was markedly different. And I often joke that like you could put an entrepreneur that's based in Boston and an investor that's based in Boston, you just stick them in a cafe in New York or in San Francisco, they'll hit it off and they'll fund each other. And then as soon as they get home, it's like, wait, did I?
Oh, wow.
Wait, yeah. It's like, beer goggle eyes. It's like, why have I just? But it's something different about like what's in the water, and so I don't know that's like something that we can change. But as a result, to answer your question of like whether or not the environment, it feels a lot harder to raise and a lot more risk averse these days.
Yeah.
What do you think might have changed from the 2014, 2015 era? I've been hearing and doing like a lot of this work that
and this might be a little contrarian to some of the stuff that you've heard, right?
Well, not necessarily even contrarian, but that there have been kind of some of these companies like Indica or Toast that have like very strong engineering culture, and then those people spin out to another company. Do you think it's less of that happening now, and it's kind of like less on that flywheel, or
that's definitely one factor, right? This might be a great task to do offline, but if you look at some of these companies that have this spirit of we built something together, we had some successful outcome, and let's go ahead and maybe it's a mafia, right? Like they go and do the next thing. And Beck is a great example of that. HubSpot's a great example of that.
Exactly.
About 10 or so years ago, I had asked some of the bigger company CEOs of folks that should also have spun out a lot of the same talent. And what was interesting was they all said to me that, yeah, we could encourage people to start the next big thing, but they all felt that within their own companies, there was still so much more to do in that one particular space, right? And so looking at it from the outside, I was like, well, come on, you're like, look at all this money you have, look at all this influence that you have. How come you're not encouraging people that have left, and how come you're not backing them? And it's just a very different mindset. And I'd love to see more companies that have that like sort of mentality. And I'll give you a good example. My former CEO, Walt Doyle, saw him this morning. When we were building our company, he openly invited a VC to come in to do an all hands to share what it was like to start a company while we were building the company. I don't know many other CEOs that would do that, right? And I remember at the time, just like, aren't you sending kind of conflicting messages? Like you're like, what is it like to start a company? But it was because, he firmly believed that, we are more than just this, the business card that we currently have in front of us right now. And so I think that mentality, I'd love to see more companies there. And I don't think I answered your question, which is 10 years ago, there were definitely other programs that were running. It's like I remember back in, I think it was maybe 2014 or 2015, like there was a Boston Syndicates program. There were 50 angels running around writing checks. And this is something that Accomplice was doing with the Angel List. And it felt like because that was so shared and spread out, there was just a lot more velocity. And I don't see that as much today, despite a lot of best efforts from investors today. And so I wish I had an answer, but like if you just walked into a room, like if 2015 was here and 2026 was here, like it would feel very different.
Yeah. Well, I keep thinking about what you're saying, where you're talking about like if a Boston investor meets a Boston entrepreneur in San Francisco, they like write the check. Coming into this, one of the hypotheses I've been trying to like figure out is like, it's always easy to scapegoat someone, right? Like if you're a bunch of founders, you're like, well, the VCs just don't believe, right? And it's like, then you have to like put yourself in their shoes, right? Like they're not investing their money, right? They have LPs, right?
They got a job to do.
Yeah, they have LPs who
got to get the returns.
They have a particular expectation and risk profile and investment thesis. So one of my theories was that like, oh well, hey, we need to give the VCs in Boston some grace. They might be raising from a different set of LPs, right? Their LPs might be more likely to invest in PE, right? They might have a different expectation than people who are, if A16Z's raising from the, Facebook Corp Dev or something, it's like that's a different profile. But then you're saying, hey, actually, no, you meet a Boston entrepreneur, Boston founder in San Francisco in the Mission, they're going to write the check. So that maybe suggests it's maybe not the LPs.
Yeah, and some of it is stage dependent, obviously, right? Yeah. Like I talked to a Series A investor like 6 months ago, someone I used to work with, and he just confided, it was just like, as a GP, it is so hard to get my job done, and the number of checks that I have, not checks in the financial sense, but like the check boxes that investment has to have these days. And then he's got to sell it to the rest of his partnership. And it was just like, he loves his job, but it was like, it was so hard to just get a deal done, right? Like there were so many reasons to say no. And this is, I don't know if it would have been any different 10 years ago, but it was just super difficult for him to even find that, right? And so I could sense that he heard the frustration in his voice. It's like, God, I want to be able to invest, but I just, can't get it over the line.
Yeah. I felt that like when we were raising our seed, I mean, it's not, especially in today's terms, a huge amount of money, but like definitely I felt like when I was talking with a San Francisco based investor, it's like, you kind of ask the question, hey, do you have check writing authority? And when you're asking that question, what you're really trying to suss out is like, are you an associate or are you a partner? Because everyone just puts partner on their LinkedIn, but they're not actually there. But I felt like more so when I was locally raising, you ask like, do you have check writing authority? And it's like, I know you're a partner, but like not all partnership, can I just write a check? I actually have to go to my IC and like figure this out. And it's like this whole internal pitching thing that you're talking about. Like that's culturally very different when you're like, when there's another sale to be done on the other side.
Yeah. And it's and the other thing is, as you know, is like where they are in their own cycle. Yeah. And I've had a handful of investors because of where where in their own raise, they had very different perspectives of deploying capital, right? And so there was one company that we were getting to the tail end of an exit process. One of the partners really wanted to double down. It's like, oh, I think we should build bigger. Another one was like, fantastic, deal sounds great. Like, because they were close to the end of it. Like they wanted that win. And then the one in the middle was kind of like, hey, let's actually evaluate. Like if we sell now, this is how much it's worth if we wait. And so that was all done obviously at the same time, right? It was a single meeting with 3 different investors, had 3 different perspectives. And it was all based on where they were, like how much dry powder they had.
Where'd they land?
We sold.
There you go.
So yeah.
Okay. Let's think a little bit around like, okay, so we've talked about 25-year-old David Chang. We've talked about some of the issues Boston faces. We've talked about some of the hypotheses. Like, let's do a genie in the bottle style, hypothetical where like David Chang found the bottle. He's going to have a couple wishes, but for some reason, David Chang cares about not his family, not himself, none of those things. He just cares about Boston tech ecosystem. Like, what would these omnipotent hypothetical wishes be?
Yeah, I think we kind of touch upon one of them, right? Like the mafias, right? Like it would be amazing to have more of this mentality of entrepreneur that once they had some success, spinning it out, investing, contributing to the network. And so that would be fantastic. But you need those wins in order to be able to deploy capital and invest. And we talked a lot about investment, but like when I refer to investing, it's spending time and making connections and helping them out and all those things. So that's definitely one. And then the other is it would be fantastic if we had some mega magnets of companies that were big tech companies in whatever spaces, right? Whether it's healthcare or life sciences or robotics, but have these magnets of companies that would be the companies that everyone in the world would just naturally go to. It's like, oh my God, if you're doing like for robotics, right? Maybe that's a good example, like many years ago, that if you're doing something in robotics, people would just naturally think of like the big behemoths here, and then it would be a magnet to pull the smart people, whether it's talent or capital, and you just had to make Boston part of your journey because that's where all the stuff is happening, the customers, the ecosystem. And so if we have a couple of these industries or microclusters of industries where you just had a few of those magnets, that would create such a draw, both externally, so outside of Boston, pulling people in, and also keep people here. I've traveled a little bit and spent a little bit of time out west, but also outside the U.S. And I think sometimes we forget about the outsized impact that we actually have. And so it always feels like, we got a little chip on our shoulder and I wish it should be a little bit better. But I go to some of these other countries, and their perception of like what we have here is like, oh my God, it'd be amazing if I lived in and then I'd have access to all this stuff. And like we kind of forget that, right?
Yeah.
Even though I'm running around in the South End, and
we have a customer based in Taipei. Every single person I've met is so intelligent and so smart and so capable. And you just hear like we think we have headwinds in Boston. And it's like they're trying to raise money, and they're, it's like they can't go to the mainland to raise money because there's all this like political issues. Then the US, like US VCs aren't going to Taiwan saying like, this is a deal, right? So you're basically stuck with the strategic, but then like what strategic understand? It's tough. I mean, there is like some, we should be humble, but also be appreciative. There's some good stuff going on around here.
Yeah, and that's a great example. And that's a first world country that has access to a lot of stuff, right? If you go to some of the other countries and other places of the world where that doesn't exist, it's like, whether it's Boston or New York or the Valley, it's like this mythical place that exists. It's like, oh my God, it's all this stuff, and they would kill to be here. And so I think you're right. We shouldn't forget that we're starting from a pretty strong position.
But we could do a lot better.
Yes, we could. Yes. So I'd want those mega magnets. I'd want those mafia mentality.
Yeah, and mega magnet, you mean like big. You're on Facebook, Google, big.
Yeah.
So we have some big companies here. They're like, successful. They're like, as an entrepreneur, I look at there's Wayfair and HubSpot and Woo, and there's all these great companies here. But it is a little different, just call a spade than Meta or Google and being the HQ for those type of places.
Yeah. And I'm not advocating, I'm sure you're not as well, but like I'm not advocating that we try to replicate what's happening elsewhere. But it's like whether it's a specific industry or a specific company, like having, like if you were to list top 5 companies in any particular space, like have them be here, right? It'd be like, well, that's where here's a great one. Sneakers, right? Like not in tech, it's not technology, but like there's so much density here that if you were in that industry, this area would be the place where you'd go to, do stuff in that, in footwear, right? And so it's like, it's that I think we would need more of, and maybe a little bit more media around it to actually promote it. But that awareness is definitely lacking.
Yeah. Cool. I think we might get a little spicier, but we'll see. So let me start with comic book fan. Do you like comic books? Do you like the Marvel movies? Anything?
Sure. Who doesn't like the Marvel movies?
Okay. All right. Lots of people don't. Lots of people like to say they don't like them, but I think they all do. Big Spider-Man quote that I always think about was, Uncle Ben says, like, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
And I feel like right now there's been so much discourse around Boston's tech and like how it could be different. And some of that discourse is from politicians.
Mhm.
Some of that discourse is from founders of 20 billion plus valuation companies that are headquartered here. Some of that discourse is coming from like institution leadership. And so I'm just curious, like, on one hand, it's like, okay, these people are very busy people.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, if you're in a position of power and you see a problem, like, do you have a responsibility to fix it? And how should we think? Like, I don't know, open table there. Like, is it fair to say like, hey, let's stop talking about it on X and let's do something? And maybe they are, and we don't, not everyone sees it. Like, I don't know. I'm just curious your reaction to that.
Yeah, I think, it's easy to criticize, right? And so
100%.
sometimes it's, for lack of any other content, it's just easy to kind of take the thing that is top of mind for news and just kind of like, throw in your hot take. That I think in order to change things locally, that you do need lots of different people rowing in that same direction. And they have to be the founders, the builders, the investors, the entrepreneurship educators, whether it's their students. And I think local government for sure plays a part in it. And you should have Eric Paley on the podcast if you haven't already invited him. And so bringing that perspective to the state and to the local government, those are all things that I think you would need. And so I think if you're someone that's in if you're one of those personas and you're finding a problem that yeah, you should also try to fix it, right? And just not kind of throw the rock against the wall. And so I do think that you have a lot of smart people here that if we structurally figure out a way to get people to work together, there are definitely places where you can benefit from like having collaboration across like these different constituencies.
Yeah, and to be fair to anyone who's actually listening, I mean, I'm not suggesting that people are just posting ticks on Twitter, right? Like, I don't know what they're doing. And some people might be dedicating 50% of their time now. And if so, kudos. Like, thank you for it. Like, I'm part of the community. I'm like super happy that you're doing that. One thing that has like kind of struck a nerve in a weird way with me of a lot of this discourse, and I know you're a product guy, so I think it'll hit it with you too, is that like I hear a lot of how do we get these people to stay in Boston? And it just reminds me of like trying to like work in product in an organization, and maybe I like finance people, but sometimes you get a finance person who's like, how can we get our customers to pay us more money? And it's like, that is such thinking about me, right? It's like the point isn't that like I just get more money from them. The point is like we build a product that creates a ton of value for them such that they're excited to pay us for it.
Totally.
Right? And I think there's some kind of analogy happening where there's like, everyone's like, how do we get people to stay in Boston? Why are these 22-year-olds leaving Boston? How do we get them to stay? And it's like, how do we create a better ecosystem where they want to stay? Or, I don't know. That strikes me, and I know we got some product guys here, so I want to hear it.
I also have a take. I think that this is pretty closely related to dog fooding, like in software development. Like, you should be testing your own product, building for yourself, like building something that you would want. So it's, at least from my perspective, and I think in some ways, like what I'm and we're gearing to solve with BUILD617 is really trying to tie into the entrepreneur perspective and building, if the concern really is that we're worried about entrepreneurs leaving or trying to make people stay, like how can they be building the product?
Yeah, and I think I have to assume best intent, right? So I think a lot of the folks that are saying, how do we keep is, I think might be a little short-sighted, but I think if all things equal, they would love to have some magnet, some way to like, some draw to have people build. And so that give first may be the thing that's missing a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't see like what happens. Well, if I give first today, I may not benefit for 10 years or 5 years. And so it's just harder for me to make that give. Yeah. And then you've got others that I think play a longer game where they like totally see, of course, I'm going to spend an extra half hour with this person. Of course, I'm going to make this introduction. And if the more people that are doing that, obviously there's a payout, but it doesn't happen until, years down the line.
I think, I saw another post from Gary Tan asked, he's like, hey, should we bring YC back to Cambridge? And I think it's like kind of related to this question, because I think if you went around the halls of, Babson or MIT or, Harvard, Northeastern, all these amazing universities, and you found the people who had entrepreneurial aspirations, and you said, how can I help you?
Yeah.
I think they would say, can you help me get into YC? And I suspect that would be an incredibly valuable thing for them. If you say, hey, actually, yes, I've got a program. I'm going to help you put your best shot in for YC. Now, if your goal is, hey, how do I keep people in Boston? Then there's some indirect things because you're going to have some leakage of people. You're like, oh, actually, I did get the best people in the YC and now they're there.
But do you think people are asking that or saying that because that's the only thing, that the only path they think,
right,
or the path of least resistance? That's like, oh, it's a big brand name. In the same way they'd go to MIT. It's like, once I'm there, then fantastic. And
right.
And I don't know, is it that, or maybe they just aren't aware of the other things, right? Because I've worked very closely with, as you mentioned in the beginning, was an entrepreneur in residence at HBS. And so I've worked with hundreds of founders there. I ran a summer venture program at Babson for 4 years. I'm a trustee at a university, and a handful, I'd say about 30 of us grassroots at different universities were just like, you know what? We've got these great assets just like a mile away from each other. Let's get them together. And so we created this whole series of like get-togethers and talent sharing and all that. And at the end of the day, when you talk to those founders, that wasn't the thing I heard the most of, right? It was more of I'm really passionate about this one idea. I've got some start, right? So either because they have experience in the industry or they've got some sort of traction. And what they want to know is, well, how do I get what's the next thing that can unblock things? And so is it a customer? Sometimes. If it's first dollar, that's sometimes that. If it's the first, really smart person, that could be an advisor / potential, co-founder, employee, all that. And so I hear that a lot more than the hey, it'd be great if I just got into the YC, right? And so just a random example, one of the other founders I worked with, his next thing was getting on Shark Tank, right? So it's just another random, well, it's got a brand, and it's like, okay, worked with him, and that was the next thing that he did. But it wasn't so much that one particular program. And I think today, I actually don't know what the YC reputation is these days, but I don't think it has the same sort of it's the only place you can go to be successful. I think there's lots of other ways to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if it's for people who we're treating as customers, the customer should be buying an outcome, which hopefully in most cases is, I want my company to be successful. So how do we as a group, sell them that and build for them to have success, which hopefully long-term is success here.
Yeah. I think I see it from, and maybe this goes back to the, there's some elitist universities around here that maybe we're part of, but
it's a shortcut, right?
Yeah.
It's the same way that,
I think a lot of people operate by you said the path of least resistance. I think a lot of people operate by the path of most prestige. And I think in some ways that is the prestigious path. And so you said, hey, if someone's on that, I think successful entrepreneurs are going to get off of that path, right? They're going to find the path of most helping my customers, or or the path of most disruptive technology. But I think a lot of people start out at, I'm looking for the path of most prestige because it helps me maintain.
A slightly different take to that.
Yeah. Oh, you do?
Yeah. It's, or maybe it's another way of looking at it, which was, it is a path of prestige, but at the same time, it's the least risky path for them. And so what was really interesting is, I can't remember who it was, but it was some founder that I was talking to, and she went to Yale as an undergrad. She worked at some McKinsey or something, and then she went to HBS and found herself working on this new thing that was very, very off course from what her path was. And so, if you looked at all the things, clearly smart, did all these things and took the path of most prestige, but those were the things that were least risky, right? And so these are all things that and I kind of think YC might be there, right?
That's
and it's
I think that's a great take.
I'm just going to be even if it implodes, I went to IC, went to San Francisco, didn't work out or whatever. And so it's just which is exactly the opposite from entrepreneurship, right? Taking risks and
I'm going to will this things, right? I'm going to will this there. Yeah.
And so I think it's maybe it's a different persona type, but it's not the only way.
Yeah, totally. All right, here we go. So you've got a bunch of, we've talked about a bunch of different things, and we're going to come up to kind of the end of the podcast, and we're going to go through rapid fire round with you. Bunch of questions. You're not allowed to spend more than, finger in the air, 40 seconds on each question.
Okay.
Let's start with, who should we talk to next and why?
I think you should get some of the heavy hitters in Boston here.
Who are they?
And so, what you guys already mentioned Halligan, but there are plenty of other people that are very influential that others will listen to, right? So you got Jason Robbins, got Diane Hessen, Amy Villeneuve, Helen Greiner, Paul English, and so I think if you get a handful of those that already have their own audiences, that would be fantastic. And then of course there's others that, the next generation of founders and folks that are building, but like, let's get some heavy hitters in here.
Got it. If BUILD617 had one large community event, maybe anyone can join or anyone can come, what should it look like?
One event. Well, that's kind of tough, right? So I think the best events are ones where it's beyond the event itself. And so even if it's like a knockdown, drag out, amazing party where you leave and you've got like 5 connections that are amazing, the thing I would love to see is like, do I have to be like, what are things that like exist after the event? And so everything I've been to that's been in person, it just disappears the next day. And so at most you have a little bit, hey, let's connect afterwards. And so whatever that event is, like pair it with some way for it to continue to live on afterwards.
I'll do one more and then I'll let Nathan take the rest. Last question from me. Next TBD Angels. I don't know if it's an investment committee. I don't know how you pass around the things. What would be the type of company that get you most excited?
Oh, for me. And so for, I'm a pretty agnostic investor these days. Like in the early days, I was very much about just staying in my own lane. And so one of the big benefits of being with a group of 300 people that are generally operators in their spaces, that you get expertise from a lot of different places. And so the next really interesting thing for me would be something that I would never have eyes on. And just as an example of some of the ones that have done really well, we've got a women's basketball shoe. We've got some other consumer products that are just like things that like I would not have seen. And so what I would love for the group to have is to find the next really big thing that I would have no business and no connection like getting in front of.
All right.
So one kind of interesting take that has been kind of making its way through the internet is that Boston entrepreneurs lack the ability to dream big. And once they start to get some success, maybe they get some investment, they're willing to just take like the early off-road, before being a unicorn or something bigger. Do you think that's a problem? Or
so I'm totally biased on this one. I don't know if it's a lack of vision. I think people do the math of, if I exit, I mean, this kind of alluded to this before. If I exit today, let's say it's a $150 million exit, or do I double down and build this for another 5 years to hit the unicorn, right? And so you got to look at the space. Do I raise another round and all that? And I think that for whatever reason, many of the businesses that are here, there's a very natural exit path that when you do the math, it's like, well, really makes sense to exit here. One of the things I'd learned from, maybe ties the last question together, in the life sciences spaces, there's natural exit paths in those industries, which I never really thought about. And so when the entrepreneur was pitching to me, she had mentioned, there's like all these other ways that you can monetize. And so your investment is actually not as risky. Like it doesn't have to go to, all the way to drug trials and to the end. It's like, well, there's a natural path after 2 years that some company will buy that asset before it gets to trials. And so I think that because of the industries that are here, there are these paths that people will just, if you do the math, like it makes sense. And many of the like big audience-based businesses, right, whether it's like Meta or Google, those are ones where it is a little bit of winner takes all kind of dynamic. And so you just kind of have to build all the way to the end, whereas even some of our consumer brands that are here don't have that same dynamic. And so I don't think it's a lack of vision. I think they're just doing the math.
And if that is the case, in some ways, some of this flywheel effect is created by big companies growing and IPOing and have like the whole mafia effect spooling. Like, do you think that we're ever going to change that? Or is that just the culture?
No, I mean, I think the optimistic side of me says that you need both. It'd be fantastic to have a couple more of the, sell a company after a couple $100 million and then go back and build something new and then attract, the next wave and get the band back together and build again. And then I think you can be very, very successful that way. And then you've got a handful of other companies where, yes, they become the big gorilla that's in the space and everyone knows that. And it's a magnet for everyone else to continue to come to the Boston area. But I don't think it's like one size fits all. I think you can be successful doing both of them.
Awesome. And one other interesting thing I've heard a lot is, people in other places going and receiving angel funding from like a Starbucks or, putting a sign on their laptop and saying, I'm raising. I don't necessarily ever think that will be the case here, but I'm curious about, how, especially with your perspective, we could improve the angel community here, and perhaps
we need to go to his gym.
Yeah,
we need to get that. We need to get to his gym.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it that loose? I mean, like literally, as you're hearing stories of people that are just like, have startup will work for food kind of thing, and just invest. I mean, like other than the Valley, are we hearing these stories or
just the Valley?
Okay, all right,
and it's just the mission, maybe Embarcadero.
It's really just like this little tiny square foot area. No, I actually don't think that's the case. I think, it's hard to change an entire ecosystem. I think the ways that we can be successful here is you make sure that the founder, the entrepreneur, whether it's a first-time founder coming out of college or someone who's done it multiple times, connect them with the right people that can help them move the business forward. And so sometimes investors, sometimes a customer, sometimes it's someone that'll work on the team. And the investment is one component of it. And so I think the angel community here, if I had one ask, it would be around expanding their networks better. Because if you talk to those newer folks, one criticism that I've heard with Boston, I actually actively go out there and try to disprove it, which is they say that it feels like it's a very closed community to them. And so as soon as I hear that, I'm like, oh, what do you mean? It's the most, it's amazingly open. And I looked at it from their perspective, which is, it's hard to break into those circles because they don't know how to get there. And then, as you guys know, once you're in one of those circles, it's fantastic, right? Like you'll help each other. And then one thing that you said during the first podcast was around like having more cheerleaders. I actually think the cheerleaders are here, right? And so I do find that you got to get in that circle. And so once you're there, they're like, oh, this is amazing. And they want to help. But it's like the awareness of that. And so I don't know how to change that part of it other than do it like it's hand-to-hand combat. So if I hear that from a new founder, the first thing I do is to go out of my way to try to connect it with like the 3 or 4 people that I think would be the amazing person that they would need, whether it's investor or someone else, to keep their business here. And it works. Like I've certainly heard from people many years after those intros have made, they're like, oh, you forgot that you made that intro to so-and-so. That's the person, that's the reason why I'm still doing what I'm doing. And I was like, wow, that's amazing.
That's fantastic.
So if people continue to do that, I think that's what keeps people here.
Yeah. Yeah. I also find, I think we're supposed to be a rapid fire round, but throwing that out the window because this is interesting. I found like when I went, when I was just starting, it was a lot of like, what's your idea? And it was a lot of like, oh, that idea isn't investable, or like you get that kind of like, I don't like your idea. Right. And then what's newer now that maybe I'm a more experienced entrepreneur or whatever, but like this is when I got into the second venture, initially, like what I heard was, I don't like your idea at all, but I'm going to back you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I've seen a lot of that from the Bay, and I want more of that here. And I think when you're talking about these closed off groups, it's kind of similar, right? It's like, those are probably the people that would just say like, I'm going to back you and you'll figure it out. And that's what I've missed in the past. Or haven't seen, and would love for entrepreneurs now who are super capable and have demonstrated how capable they are, even if they have some like idea that an investor doesn't like. They're still like, I don't like your idea, but I like you enough. I'll do the pre-seed. Or
and that I totally agree with. Right, like you need that comfort level to understand who that person is, and the shortcut for that is if I already know you and I know you're going to deliver, I know you just know how to grind, you know how to get it done. And even if the idea is bad, you're going to figure out a better idea. And early stage is all about that. Like every single company's gone through a near-death experience, right? Like it's every successful company has like gone through this thing. And so how can you be pretty bold as an investor, say, oh, I know better than everyone else that this is going to be that's the only idea that'll work. And so I do think the confidence you have in someone like really just outweighs like anything else, especially at the early stages.
Closing question. Really appreciate you spending all this time with us today.
It's fun, even though you tricked me with this.
Yeah, we tricked you that MIT background. We're like, you want to say something bad about MIT? Yeah. No. Everyone's got a lot of good stuff to say, a lot of constructive stuff to say. I've heard some good stuff about BUILD617, so we appreciate that. But the constructive stuff, what should we be, we've obviously have some limited time, but we're clearly passionate about the topic of Boston tech scene. What's your advice to us? What would you like to see us go do? Who would you like to put on blast that should talk to us? This is your moment for us to.
I think the main one, since we hadn't dug into too much, is I think for any movement to be successful, you have to have people who really believe the mission, and also like do something to move the ball forward. And so to, rather than push the ball up the hill, if you can engage the right folks when it comes to early stage founders, the builders, the investors, the folks in government, universities, like deputize, and it's more than just being an ambassador, but like find like what their pain points are and then give them the ability to move the ball forward in whatever ecosystem they're in, and they obviously have to make it their own, right? And so we'll just use schools as an example. If the mission for a lot of these schools is to make sure they attract the brightest and the brightest stay around and they contribute back and make donations to the school, and if they do through entrepreneurship, then find the top 10 people that are the most influential in that world and have them be the circle that everyone else wants to join, right? And so you do that around the space. I know we're very builder heavy, and so I have no doubt that we're going to get a good group of people there, but builders can only do so much, right? And so imagine if you had like a group of like, a dozen investors that were like obsessed with BUILD617 and like, oh my God, what can I do next? Because it benefits me, benefits the ecosystem. And you get that across with builders and entrepreneurs and execs. I think that's what gets that flywheel going.
Yeah. All right. David Chang, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right.